Katsina police neutralize 2 kidnappers, rescues victims.
Federal government to provide legal framework for franchise administration in the country.
Northeast Development Commission commends post-crisis management of insurgency in the Northeast.
And on Good Morning Nigeria today, we shall discuss the update on the echo current.
Now, let's begin by updating you on the developments so far on the echo currency saga. As you may be aware by now, Nigeria, ministers of finance and governors of Central Bank of the West African Monetary Zone, WAMS, have unequivocally rejected and the adoption of the echo currency by the Francophone West African member countries.
Well, Rhoda, as you indicated, the members of the West African Monetary Zone rejected the unilateral decision by the chairman of the West African Economic and Monetary Union, that's Alassane Ouattara, and this rejection was at an extraordinary meeting that took place last week in Abuja. And just to add that a decision by the French-speaking West African countries is being backed by France ahead of the formal adoption of ECO as a common currency for all ECOWAS member states.
The communique issued at the end of the meeting states in quotes, WAM's Convergence Council wishes to emphasize that this action is not in line with the decision of the Authority of Heads of State and Government of ECOWAS for the adoption of the ECO as the name of an independent ECOWAS single currency.
Now, WAMS also calls on all member countries, that's the self ECOWAS, to adhere to decisions of the institution on the implementation of the revised roadmap of the ECOWAS single currency program. It also recommends that an extraordinary summit of heads of state and governments of the region be convened to further discuss the development.
And if you recall, in our earlier conversations on this topic, guests identified 3 trajectories in which the issue can be analyzed. Specifically, Professor Kenife traced the origin back to the 1940s when Francophone West African countries aligned their currency with that of France, being their colonial powers.
All right, Professor Ife, of course, described the development, that's the move towards an eco currency, as a minefield for Nigeria, and advised that the country take a look at this very critically with respect to formally ramping up the economic integration arising from eco currency. Ken Okoha, on the other hand, who was also one of the guests, suggested Nigeria should look beyond the economic connotations and, in fact, seek to interrogate further the emerging social and political issues which were not considered previously by the framers of the integration model.
Now, from the perspective of the DG Lagos Chambers of Commerce and Industry, the biggest challenge with Nigeria and indeed ECOWAS should prioritize are issues of tariff barriers created by agencies of government, importation and language. So where do we go from here? I mean, what should be the next line of action for Nigeria? On Good Morning Nigeria today, we examine deeper the issues of adoption of the eco currency by ECOWAS, the rejection of the unilateral adoption by Francophone West African countries, and implication on emerging social and political vagaries in the region. I'm Rhoda Anonim. Thank you for joining us on Good Morning Nigeria today.
And I'm Kingsley Osadolo. I join my colleague Rhoda to also welcome you to the program. We are broadcasting, as always, live on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority. We're right here in our Abuja headquarters studios and around the Federal Capital Territory this morning. It's foggy. So those who are still driving, drive with a great deal of care. We also have our complimentary segments, including newspaper review, sports foreign, and others. In the meantime, let's join our colleague, Ifeoma Ojinta, for the highlights of the morning news. Good morning, Ifeoma.
Good morning, Kingsley and Rhoda. Good morning, Nigeria. Here is the morning news. Issues relating to environmental preservation and sustainability for job and economic prosperity dominated as Charles, the Prince of Wales, played host to President Muhammadu Buhari in Scotland.
The major takeaway is essentially that the Prince is now committed to helping to, first of all, get experts into Nigeria to assist in certain areas such as reforestation, which is a priority for us, and also ultimately helping mobilizing investors. The strategy that the Prince really emphasized was the possibility of bringing together huge investors. He talked about having the largest pool or conglomerate of investors ever in the world who would be able to carry out actions that will be, friendly to the environment, but as I said, in a sustainable way.
President Muhammadu Buhari is committed to his promise that no part of the country will be allowed to suffer under his administration by ensuring that all nooks and crannies of the land enjoys dividends of democracy. Minister of Niger Delta, Senator Godswill Akpabio, made this known during the inauguration and handing over ceremony of Udu Etong Ibiaku Uruan erosion control work.
Before now, we had a very terrible experience. Terrible in the sense that the movement of people from Duetongo to Ibiakuran down to Itu was very impossible.
The whole of this area was totally unaccessible. I really appreciate the effort of the Mr. President for having deemed it fit to recognize this community with this laudable project.
Let me underscore the present administration's determination to continue with the implementation of all genuine government policies and all genuine agreements and contracts at both national and international levels in this next level of governance.
That I will take through the hill, through that bad portion, through the bush track, and come up here, because these are the people that President Buhari and I protect. It doesn't matter whether their road is good or not.
The federal government is to work out modalities to set up and strengthen the legal basis for the franchise administration being administered by the National Office for Technology Acquisition and Promotion. Minister of State, Science and Technology, Mohammed Abdullahi, confirmed this among other plans and objectives the ministry hopes to achieve this year, which are essentially focused towards energizing the Nigerian market and economy for job and wealth creation. He said most franchise that are Nigeria comes with a lot of baggage and therefore needs proper regulation.
We want to strengthen that legal framework for franchise in terms of regulation so that every other franchise that will come to Nigeria must be able to adapt, to local content, in such a manner that it will comply with the Executive Order number 5.
Now, Katsina State Police Command has killed 2 kidnappers and rescued a victim after engaging in a gun duel at Yatalata village in Manufashi local government area of the state. The police also apprehended a kidnapper at the scene of the incident.
We are determined more than ever before to deal decisively with any individual or group of individual criminals who may decide to contemplate testing the will of His Excellency, the Executive Governor of Katsina State, who was magnanimous enough to call for change of attitude by all criminals. Any violation of the Riot Act will be severely dealt with.
Meanwhile, the post-crisis management of Boko Haram insurgency by the federal government is the right step in the right direction in the fight against insurgency. This is the impression of the Northeast Development Commission on a visit to the radicalization, reorientation and reintegration camp in Malam Sidi, Gobe State.
An outfit, we have also been engaging in outreach, free medical outreach, and other civil-military relationship to foster this cordial relationship that we're having with the people of Gombe.
10 kVA electric generator for camp cleaning and release of funds for running and maintenance of electric power generators, constant purchase of PMS or HU, purchase of motorized chair and limbs for physically challenged clients.
The Ministry of Science and Technology and the University of Dundee, Scotland, are to develop a technical committee to focus on the study of nanotechnology, biotechnology, forensics and information communication technology for mutual benefits. Minister of State for Science and Technology Abdullahi Mohammed said this when he received the Associate Dean of the University, Professor Peter McLeavy, and the Nigerian chapter of the university's Alumni Association in his office. The minister commended the university for being a top destination of study for Nigerian students from the undergraduate to doctorate levels, adding that the ministry will tap into the university's well of knowledge because science, technology and innovation are the key to the future.
We are particularly interested in biotechnology, forensics, ICT. We will be in close contact with the alumni so that we can raise a small technical committee.
The Minister of Information and Culture, Lai Mohammed, is one of the recipients of awards presented to individuals who have positively impacted on the lives of the Nigerian public. The award was given at the 2020 valedictory ceremony of graduating law students of Igbinedion University, Okada, Edo State.
Your first job may not be your career. Most of you will start jobs, but change them at least once, maybe twice, or even more. Stand firm for the truth always. And you now have the opportunity to become leaders.
Alhaji Lai Mohammed, the service to the country, service to humanity. You can see the dedication, the seriousness, the discipline and the humility that he carries out his assignment. And I believe that his training as a lawyer is, to a large extent, has contributed to the success of his career today.
And the Minister of Education, Adamu, has directed the Governing Council of the Ahmadu Bello University, Zaria, and the Selection Board to proceed with all processes required for the appointment of a new Vice-Chancellor for the institution. The ministry were responding to a request by the Vice-Chancellor of the university for the intervention of the Obi of Onitsha in the disagreement over the selection process, said the selection process should proceed as scheduled in accordance with approved guidelines, having established that the process and procedures adopted in the ongoing selection exercise are constant with the approved guidelines and the University Act. The minister said proceedings should be continued to a logical conclusion. And that concludes the...
All right, thank you very much for being there. And if you've just joined us, you're watching Good Morning Nigeria. Time now for us to review some of the national dailies.
Our newspaper reviewer, Bayo Atebe, is right here with us at the studios. Bayo, good morning and welcome.
Thank you. Kinsley, good morning. Good morning, Rhoda.
Good morning,
Good
Bayo.
morning, Nigeria.
Right.
All right, let's begin with a review of the Leadership newspaper. On the Leadership newspaper, you'll see there Just below the nameplate, Nigeria woos investors to bitumen mining. Nigeria woos investors to bitumen mining. That's below the nameplate. Amotekun, not regional army, says Governor Akeredolu. That's on page 13. The lead story says, federal government exempts school fees, 20 food items from new VAT rate. Federal government exempts school fees, 20 food items from new VAT rate. That's on page 4. Waivers 3.5 billion naira tax burden for insurance companies. That's the rider to that lead story. And if you come down, uncertainty in Kano, Sokoto, as Supreme Court rules today. PDP protest in states over Imo storms Abuja today. That's a rider to that lead story. Now let's go to the foot of the paper. Almajiris, victims of parental neglect, says Emir Sanusi II. That's on page 34. Almajiris, victims of parental neglect, says Emir Sanusi II. 20 train coaches to arrive Nigeria this week, says Minister. Construction of Boniyadi Road excites Yobe residents. That's on page 14. And finally, fake abduction, 3 in police net for 10 million naira ransom demand. That's on page 16 of the leadership. Those are the stories trending on the front page.
Okay, let's take a look at the Punch newspaper. Punch, above the nameplate, 20 food items, pads and others get VAT exemption. Details on page 31. We are not targeting any ethnic group. Southwest governors allay fears with a rider. Go ahead, let federal government go to court. Afe Babalola tells governors. That's on page 2. 17 soldiers killed, scores abducted in fresh Boko Haram attack. That's page 11. And then 2 earpieces there beside the nameplate. Lear is around Lake Chad, says released Plateau aid worker. And 20 coaches arrive for Lagos, Ibadan, and Abuja, Kaduna train services. A late story says PDP and APC go spiritual as Supreme Court decides Sokoto, Benue, Kano, and Bauchi polls today. We foresee danger. That's according to Bauchi elders. Kano PDP members pray and fast. And then the photographs there on the front page of the paper above the strip advert says Imo PDP protests, alleges Supreme Court's manipulation and demands CJN's sacking. That's on page 16. And you can see the protests there from Owerri and Abeokuta. My re-election is certain, declares Obaseki. That's page 10. Use grants wisely or be prosecuted, says Ganduje. And Minister directs ABU to conclude Vice Chancellor selection. And police arrest cattle thieves, recover 78 cows in Niger. Details on page 8. Bayo.
Well, let's start with the development in the United Kingdom today. Nigeria is joining some African countries in the UK Africa Summit to woo investors to Africa. President Muhammadu Buhari is leading the Nigerian team and will be highlighting the potentials that Nigeria has and also happen on the ease of doing business in Nigeria. It's not the first one. Nigeria has been part of the Japan-Africa Initiative, Japan-China Initiative, Japan-Russia Initiative, Nigeria-Russia Initiative, as well as Nigeria-Saudi Arabia Initiative. All these initiatives, it is hoped, will increase opportunities of investment in Nigeria. Meanwhile, papers are happening on the uncertainties that has pervaded the city of Kano and Sokoto. This is owed to the potential that the Supreme Court will be delivering a judgment today. It may be recalled that last Tuesday, after the councils concluded their briefs, the Chief Justice of Nigeria indicated that the Supreme Court will be delivering judgment today. In Kano, you have the PDP's Abba Yusuf, who is challenging the victory of Governor Abdullahi Ganduje. And in Sokoto, you have Ahmed Aliyu of the All Progressive Congress, who is challenging the election of Governor Aminu Waziri Tambuwal. Following the development of last week, in which Governor of Hope Uzodinma replaced Emeka Ihedioha, as governor of Imo State, anything can happen depending upon the facts of law. Meanwhile, the People's Democratic Party members in Imo State yesterday held a rally and roamed the streets of Owerri protesting. They were protesting the Supreme Court's judgment which ousted Emeka Ihedioha as governor. Dressed in black and carried several placards, they were urging the Supreme Court to immediately reverse itself by restoring Emeka Ihedioha as their governor. In another development, members of the People's Democratic Party also held an emergency meeting at which they declared that they will resort to public disobedience to ensure that what Kola Ologodia, the National Publicity Secretary, described as their stolen mandate to be restored. The other story of interest is the pronouncement from the Minister of Police Affairs. He is talking about the Southwest Security Amotekun, and the Minister of Police Affairs gave the clarification while speaking in Sokoto. He says that the intention of the Southwest Security outfit is supposed to be a support for other security agencies, and therefore what he described as regional police, he says, is unconstitutional, and he has emphasized that such cannot pass the test of law. However, if history is anything to go by, in Kano State in 2003, Governor Ibrahim Shekarau assented to a law of the Kano State House of Assembly establishing Hisbah. The Inspector General of Police then, Sunday Hidero, declared it as illegal. Subsequently, on February 7th, 2006, the commandant and chairman of the Hisbah and his deputy were arrested in Kano and brought to Abuja. They were detained. Subsequently, the Attorney General of Kano State went to the Supreme Court and the issue were resolved. The essence is this: there could be disputations between the federal and state government about issues, but the best approach, rather than heat up the polity, is to go to the courts and resolve them.
All right, Bayo, let's
before we take the editorial, there is the issue of the VAT.
Yes.
And the items that have been exempted from the increment. Now we know it's now 7.5% of the basis of the Finance Act. I was just wondering, because we've had cause to discuss VAT on Good Morning Nigeria. What is our understanding of value-added tax? I know that sometimes we make the absolute comparison, as it were, with other African countries and say, oh, elsewhere VAT is 15%, elsewhere is 30% or 20%, and so on and so forth. Now we are told that, okay, school fees for nursery, primary, secondary, and tertiary fees have been exempted from VAT. What is the value added to school fees? In the first instance, why should there be VAT in the first instance on school fees?
Well, it beats me, my imagination too. But I think the essence is this: the Honourable Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning has provided a clarification. The intentment is to make sure that people do not mix it up and also exaggerate the areas of enforcement as far as value-added tax is concerned. Value-added tax is universally, world over, a system of government trying to get revenue for its development programs, and it is strictly for itemized consumer items. It is when you consume those items for which value is added that you pay those tax, and it is paid at the point where the purchases are made. I think the clarification became necessary in the sense that an impression has been created that every other thing is going to be VATed, and that is not correct.
Well, yeah, as I said, I mean, the explanation is why, when we are seeking, is why were you going to have school fees as part of VAT? Now, there's even more challenging thing, likely, is the items that are now exempt from VAT. Those items include food items, additives such as honey, bread, cereals, cooking oils, culinary herbs, fish, flour, starch, fruits, fresh or dried, live or raw meat and poultry, milk, nuts, roots, salt, vegetable, water, that's natural and table water, locally manufactured sanitary towels, pads or tampons. Okay, fine. Now I go to the supermarket and I pick a wide variety of items. So at the till, is it going to be my responsibility now or that of the checker to select the items that are vatable and the items that are not vatable? And what kind of clumsy transaction would that be? I'm just wondering. Or on the shelves, are you not going to indicate on the shelves or on the aisles to say these items? Of course, if you go to the liquor section, you would know that those items are vatable. Or beverages, you say, okay, these ones are vatable. But excuse me, I buy, the product names. Series, conflicts by whatever name, and any of those beverage drinks, you also know the names. So beverage drinks, are they exempt from this one or series? If I buy conflicts and I buy beverage and I buy sugar, which one are you going to VAT?
I see the challenge for the endpoint cashiers because usually what the cashiers usually do is to ensure that they tally all what you have purchased and at the end punch the VAT and the percentage rules all over.
Precisely.
Now from what you have pointed out, the challenge will be that you probably will have to list the non-VAT items and pay for them separately while you pay for the VATed items separately. Otherwise, there's no way you are going to have a mix. You can avoid the mismatch in items that are
you can be
vatable.
sure that there will be long waiting lines. As you want to say, they are arguing, no, this one is vatable, the other one is not. Vatable. So whose discretion will it now be to identify the one that is vatable and the one that is not vatable?
Initially, there will be this clumsiness, but as time goes on, I think they will buy it. And
All right, let's take our editorial. And the editorial is on the implication of the Finance Act. And let me just take a few paragraphs. It says, President Muhammadu Buhari on Monday, January 13, 2020, signed the finance bill into law, paving the way for the implementation of its provision. One notable provision of the Act is the increase in the value-added tax from 5% to 7.5%. Well, let me now go to the bottom. It said it's a welcome development, but government must, however, ensure an equitable balance between what it takes from the people through tax and what it gives back in terms of development. In doing this, there's every need to ensure that corruption and waste is tackled in the system so as not to jeopardize the notable intention of government.
VAT is a revenue for government.
Yeah.
And the innovation this time around is that when the 2020 budget was presented, it went with a finance bill. And with it ascended to law now, it is going to also set parameters for development projects, for VAT, and several other initiatives of government. And it also offers an opportunity for people to use that finance law to hold those in government accountable to their promises according to the 2020 budget. However, like you pointed out, one cannot run away from the fact that there has always been concern that tax and revenue generated for the purposes of development sometimes get frittered away. And that is why this administration is happening on the war against corruption. If it succeeds, and I think it is succeeding, we'll be able to eliminate revenue meant for development that is frittered into private pockets.
All right, Bayo, thank you very much for being with us this morning. Hopefully we'll see you again tomorrow morning.
Thank you very much.
All right, you're watching Good Morning Nigeria. We'll take a break. When we come back, of course, we'll begin our conversation segment where we're looking at an update on the Echo currency. So stay with us. All right, you're welcome back, and you're still watching Good Morning Nigeria. Just before the break, I indicated that this morning we're looking at an update on the eco currency, just to indicate that this is a topic that we had discussed just about a week or a week plus ago, but then we're giving you an update this morning, and we have guests in the house. But now, sometime in December 2019, the media space was greeted with the news of the pronouncement by the 8 member nations of the French-speaking part of ECOWAS on the adoption and subsequent change of their currency name from CFA francs to ECO in 2020. In this background report, Abdusalami Jibril takes a look at the outcome of the extraordinary ECOWAS meeting held in Abuja recently to counter this adoption.
In December last year, Côte d'Ivoire's President Alassane Ouattara and French President Emmanuel Macron announced that the CFA francs, which had been in place since 1945, would be discarded and the ECO adopted by the 8 francophone countries of ECOWAS member states. Since then, the announcement has generated discussions in the public space on implications of the decision on the wider ECOWAS single currency. Subsequently, the unilateral decision prompted a meeting of the Ministers of Finance and the governors of the central banks of the West African Monetary Zone in Abuja. Principal decisions reached at the meeting were the rejection of the ECO currency and recommendations for an extraordinary summit of heads of state and government of the West African Monetary Zone member states to be convened soon to discuss the matter and other related issues.
WAM's Convergence Council reiterates the importance for all ECOWAS member countries to adhere to the decisions of the ECOWAS Authority heads of states and government towards the implementation of the revised roadmap of the ECOWAS single currency program.
In retrospect, the adoption of the ECOWAS currency is part of the stages of the integrated process of the ECOWAS states. However, while experts are of the opinion that the adoption of the single currency will promote regional trade and investment, the target launch date for the currency has been postponed several times. On Good Morning Nigeria, guests will examine the wider implication of the move to unilaterally rename the CFA francs and adopt the ECO, while also highlighting significant undertones of this process.
All right, thank you very much, Salam Jibril, for that background. Here with us in the Abuja studios, would like to welcome Dr. Chijioke Ikechukwu, who is the former Director General of the Abuja Chamber of Commerce and Industry.
It's my pleasure. Thank you very much. My pleasure.
Also here with us in the studios is Professor of Economics at the University of Abuja, Nazifi Dharma. Prof, pleasure to have you with us on the program.
Good morning, and good morning, Nigerians.
And also here, another familiar face on Good Morning Nigeria, Dr. Emeka Okengu, a development economist.
Pleasure, sir. Pleasure so honor to be here. Good morning, Nigerians.
And from our Benin Network studios, we have another regular face on Good Morning Nigeria, another professor of economics, Mike Obadan, who is also a member of the Central Bank of Nigeria Monetary Policy Committee. Prof, pleasure to have you with us on the program.
Thank you very much, Kingsley. Good morning, Nigeria.
All right, so thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us on the program this morning. Let's begin with Professor Nazifi Dharma. Now, Nigeria, Ghana, Gambia, Guinea, Liberia, Sierra Leone, about 6 of them have rejected the adoption of ECO as the proposed currency for Africa. What does this indicate?
Well, I think the decision by the English-speaking West African countries to reject this neocolonial imposition in the name of ECO, superheaded by French as part of its continuous hegemony and destabilization of Africa and Nigeria in particular, I think is the right decision and patriotic one for that matter. If you recall back, based on our historical antecedents, in the last 50, 60 years, the French have played a very major devastating role, economically, politically, and socially, to destroy Africa and most African countries that it has contact with. If you look back at what happened during the Civil War, we know the role that French played. And there are incontrovertible evidences and allegations of the role the French is playing in the current Boko Haram struggle. If you look at the documentary played by Al Jazeera, it is titled French-African Connection. There were incontrovertible evidences provided by former agents or secret agents of France about the destabilizing role of France in Africa. So I am never at all surprised by this action. And up till today, nobody in the French government has come out and give a rejoinder about that Al Jazeera documentary. So what has happened with the French bringing the French-speaking countries and then taking this decision is part of the continuation of the economic war by France against Nigeria. Nigeria is a dominant country in West Africa. That's nothing anybody can do about that. It's a reality. In terms of size, in terms of strength, in terms of the can-do spirit of an average African, you find it in a Nigerian. And the fact that even in the absence of normal, informal economic indices, Nigerians are trading all over West and Central Africa. If you go to Idumota market, people take textile materials from Idumota across the West African sub up to Gabon. If you go to Dawano market, it's the biggest grain market in Africa. Grains are loaded from there up to Central African Republic and even Algeria. So the reality is that economic integration in the context of Nigeria spearheading it is injurious to the immediate, medium, and long-term interests of France, and therefore it will do everything to destroy it. Remember, after the attainment of political independence, the French-speaking countries maintain a very good parity and relationship in terms of their financial management with France, to the extent that they keep almost 50% of all their reserves in the Central Bank of France. And literally, the something is almost being continued under the so-called ECO that is being adopted. So it is not surprising at all that this is being done. So what is most important is that in the context of this, which I am absolutely happy that it has happened, it is now left for the English-speaking West African countries to wake up from their deep slumber and realize the long-term treachery that France and their French-speaking neighbors have been doing against their economic interests. Remember, literally all our neighbors are French-speaking, and all of them have violated inadvertently and on a continuous basis the ECOWAS protocol of origin relating to imported goods. And they have used their borders, they have done so much into our economy, they have destroyed Nigerian economy persistently and continuously, and I think it is now for us to wake up from our slumber, take action, be patriotic, and safeguard our long-term economic interests in the face of continuous hegemony by France using proxies that are our neighbors.
Professor Dama, thank you very much for the opening salvo. Let's bring in now Dr. Emeka Okengo. Eco currency for West Africa as proposed by the heads of state and government of the ECOWAS International Institution. To be or not to be?
Thank you very much, sir. Let me start with one very popular phrase in the army. It's called catch-22. What people call between the devil and the deep blue sea. Which either way you go, men will die. For me, to drag it or stretch it a little bit from the point that Professor Nazivi had taken it, we must be very, very careful. A common currency is good, is needed, is needful. And if we understand it very well. I think the major issue here is that do we understand what we're up and against? Professor Nazifi had brought out clearly that aspect of it that is conspiratorial, where you now have your Seven Sisters, if you may, your 1885 conference still living, if you may. But I mean, it's an old song. With people like him, being professors of international repute, and we're still talking about not being able to rein in conspiracies, by France, which is not in any better economic situation than we are, is actually a little bit worrisome. But what point am I trying to make? I think that this is targeted at AFTA. And I think they are bringing in the catch-22 situation. Okay? Start a fire, expect a response, and then make certain that Africa does not turn into a common market. And I'm going to say this based on one very popular statue. And each time I'm in Europe, I look at that statue. It's a statue in front of the United Nations. You see that guy with the sword? Okay? And with the hammer. Go and look at what is written under there. He said, let's turn our swords into plows. Never again shall Europe, face any kind of threat. I'm trying to paraphrase it. So whatever it is that we're seeing today, the Boko Haram angle to it, the Seven Sisters angle to it, a country that means little or nothing into it, is not even the Euro Secretariat that is even now proposing this, is Macron, who comes to Lagos to dance Awilo and eat pepper soup and says to you that he's a Lagos boy. We must be able to think this a little deeper. In saying no to a common currency, okay, what are we saying yes to? And if we are saying yes to a common currency, what are the chances and the risks therein contained? And this is where I think the challenge of this discussion for today, I think, is supposed to be deepening it. We must be able to look at it very clearly. And probably along the line, go as deep as looking at Rothschilds. Are we certain that the French or Macron is just not the sound of a Rothschild story that everybody talks about? Are we certain that what's happening today is not intended to make certain that the so-called breakup being envisaged that was to happen in 2015 hasn't been triggered? Because, take it or leave it, Nigeria is the largest, biggest economy in the whole of Black Africa. However, what drives this Nigerian economy? Is it our capacity to be able to sustain production? If we're talking about a currency, something must support your currency. Everybody talks about the e-governance and e-commerce. I think in trying to process this, we're going to be finding clearly that if we can play right, this might be an opportunity for us to be able to reverse, the fortunes of Africa as a continent. But if we play into the hands of these people, I see us losing, more than we're going to gain by this just very simple, loud no, okay, as a position.
All right, let's go to Benin, where we have Michael Bada. Michael Bada, let's get your take on this.
Thank you very much, Rhoda. Well, let me say that whether the ECO currency is to be or not to be, in the context of its original conception as a sub-regional currency for the 15 ECOWAS member countries, will depend on many factors, the latest of which is the unilateral declaration by the Francophone group, the West African Economic and Monetary Union, through the president of Côte d'Ivoire and the president of France, to the effect that the ECO is now being adopted or will be adopted or will replace the CFA franc. And of course, the other factors would also come to play as to whether the member countries are able to comply with the laid down fiscal requirements called the macroeconomic convergence criteria. Well, all this while, progress has been slow in the implementation of the roadmap aimed at bringing about the single currency. And progress has been slow for various reasons. But as at last year, as Kingsley rightly said in the opening statement, the heads of state, the authority of heads of state and government of ECOWAS formally adopted the ECO as the name for the single currency envisaged for the entire sub-region. The name has been floated for quite some time, since the early 2000s with WAMS and all that, but it was formally adopted last year. Now, with the latest development of unilateral declaration, then further doubts have been created as to whether the goal of a monetary union, single currency, will be realized, in ECOWAS. Let me say straight away that the unilateral declaration of ECO as the currency for the Francophone zone, creates many challenges and problems. Ordinarily, with the reforms of the CFA franc listed by the Ivorian president relating to delinking of the CFA from the French franc, abolishing the deposit of 50% of the various countries' reserves with the French treasury and all that. Those reforms ordinarily are commendable. They were reforms that were expected from the group by the whole of ECOWAS over the years, which would eventually lead to a delinking of CFA and the economies of that subgroup from France. But now there is the unilateral declaration, which I consider to be in bad faith, because it appears to be a situation whereby the Francophone group has hijacked the name ECO without consultation in whatever form with the entire body of ECOWAS. For me, it's a kind of coup d'etat, because the 15 member countries had initially agreed that this is the name that would be given the currency, and the group will explore the possibility of actualizing the single currency this year. And so for them now to come in and then on their own say that ECO is the name of CFA, raises many questions and casts further doubts on the viability of the single currency project in the sub-region. Well, let me say that the benefit of doubt at this point in time can be given to that group, to the extent that the authority of heads of state and government can engage them in discussions to actually find out what their intentions are. If it is found that their intentions is to hijack the name and operate on their own without integrating with the West African monetary zone, then certain decisions will have to be taken. One of which will be what will be the fate of ECOWAS as a whole in the medium long term. Because in that case, it means they're now they'll be working as a separate sub-regional monetary union, which they had always been anyway. And WAMS, on the other hand, as the West African monetary zone, may now have to concentrate on actualizing a monetary union for the West African Monetary Zone, that is to say, for the 6 countries, 6 Anglophone countries, including Guinea. But you see, that in itself will be a divisive, approach, so which would have been instigated by the Francophone group. So as at now, there is so much cloud, there is so much uncertainty as to the future of the ECO or even the single currency project as it relates to the entire sub-region. In the next few weeks, months, I believe a series of engagements will have to take place to determine the future of the West African Monetary Integration Project.
All right. Thank you very much there, Professor Mike Abadan. We'll return to you in the course of the conversation. Let's come back to Abuja. Dr. Chijioke Ekechukwu, former Director General of the Abuja Chamber of Commerce and Industry. What's your perspective on what's playing out now with regard to ECO?
In business, they say there has to be utmost good faith. And the fact, again, that when you come to equity, you must come with clean hands. It was so obvious with what happened with the Francophone countries that there were ulterior motives. Ulterior motives because the heads of government of West African countries have agreed on the convergence criteria to meet. And these criteria were very clear. The criteria were such that only one country, Togo, had met it. The fact that your budget deficit cannot be more than 3%. The fact that your inflation rate cannot be more than 10% on average, and of course in the long run they should be targeting about 5%. The fact that your reserve should be able to fund up to 3 3-month importations, and many more. And of course the debt to revenue ratio. Now, all these things were said, and in all these things that have been said, no single West African country had met it except Togo. And so for them to just adopt this name, coming to the ECOWAS agreement, then means that we need to look at the ulterior motives of these countries, especially with their relationship with France. We are not oblivious of what France has been doing with all the Francophone countries, and of course taking opportunities and taking advantage of most of their needs in the past to be able to take 50%, like the Prof said, 50% of their deposit, their reserves in France. Probably one could see that France is just targeting or playing a particular role here to be able to get the foreign reserves of all these African countries, all these West African countries again. And so the involvement of France is that aspect that we are not comfortable with, Nigerians are not comfortable with. And if there must be any move made in this single currency, it must be championed by Nigeria, the largest economy in Africa. And of course, indeed, the largest economy in West Africa. So if anything has to be taken, any decision has to be taken, it has to come from Nigeria. And not for these West African countries, Francophone countries, to come and want to give, say, by 2020, their names will change. The name of their currencies will change. So I am thinking, of course, it was necessary that they went back to say, we are going to meet again. All the heads of state of West African countries will meet again to think about this. And in thinking about it again, we need to look at possibilities of whether we indeed need this single currency. With all the efforts made by these countries, do we really need it again? And if we need it, what is in there for us? Everybody's talking about integration of West African trade. Everybody's talking about ease of doing business within West Africa. What volume of trade and businesses have we been doing with these countries? And has it been a net, a deficit trade, or we're doing a surplus trade with them? And so, even if it's any of these two, we need to look at it again. Do we really need to get into this single currency, or should we just get back and continue with what we're doing? I'm sure when they meet again, these are the things, the considerations they're going to give before thinking about the possibilities. Because I do not see the possibility that France will just hands off completely. Even if they hands off, they're still going to use some stooges somewhere to do it. You know, many times they still think African countries are still as backward as we used to be. we have come out of all those and we need to get it clearer now.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Chijioke. Professor Nazifi Dama, let's come back to you. Managing the political economy can often be very challenging. Dr. Chijioke has referenced the phrase utmost good faith, or ubere my fide, as is often referred to in insurance. Here we are, the authority of the heads of state and government of all the member states of ECOWAS agreed to say, look, this is what we are going to do. And the name we are going to use from 2020 will be ECHO. Yeah. And now, after that, some of the members of this same ECOWAS gather together and now say, no, from 2020, our own name will change from CEPHA and now become ECHO. I was just wondering, considering some of the monetary alterations that they have had, or monetary policy changes that they have had, particularly in their relationship with France, is this just a play on name? And if so, why provocatively do so?
Well, thank you very much, Kingsley. But before I answer your question, let us take a look at retroactive analysis of the convergence criteria. There is an issue relating to total indebtedness as a proportion of GDP, or sorry, budget deficit as a proportion of GDP, which should be within a threshold of 3%. The issue of inflation, which maximally should not be more than 5%. And then the issue of proportion of total public expenditure devoted for payment of salaries, which shouldn't be more than 35%. Now, if you look at all these macroeconomic criteria, in the last 20 years, a lot of the countries have achieved some and have failed in some. But if you look at each and every one of them, in the context of what has happened with this coup d'etat by France, is a wake-up call, particularly for Nigeria and the other countries, to put their economies in proper perspective. The reality is that the world is continuously converging toward cooperation, and therefore ECOWAS cannot be left aside. But in the context of what has happened, just like what Professor Obadan said and what my colleague Chijoke said, we don't need to rush and take decision. We need to have deep-rooted thinking and analysis as to what can we do to strengthen our economies internally, to make sure that the individual 6 countries that have been left out of the ECO can now be able to achieve those convergence criteria, and then possibly what new name of currency can be adopted by the 6 West African countries that have been sidelined with the adoption of the ECO. But importantly, as I said, achievement of all those macroeconomic criteria predicates a very good internal economic management, which literally most of the West African countries have failed. And if you put your economy in proper perspective, it is easier to achieve those convergence criteria and be able to work as a team toward a single currency for the English-speaking West African countries. Because the reality is that we have historical linkages that you cannot root out, that have been destroyed by colonialism. You could remember, I told you, my maternal granddad, his grave is in Abuja because of his trading base, which is in Ouagadougou, Burkina Faso. And you have so many other things like that across the West African sub-region. So I think it's not something we need to rush, but importantly, I think it has given our economic managers an opportunity for us to have deep-rooted thinking of what we can do to strengthen our economies internally, and then achieve the convergence criteria and come up with a strategy for a possible alternative to ECO within the 6 West African countries that have been sidelined.
All right, thank you very much, Professor Nazifi. Dr. Emeka Okengo, I want you to speak more on the thoughts that you first raised as to, us not just saying no to this, but, critically taking a look at it as to something we might need, or something looking at the positive aspects of it rather than just saying no to it.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Rhoda. I also want to ask a very rhetorical question. Who determined the convergence of 1 points? On whose plate are we running? Okay? And these countries, so-called West African countries that we're all now, trying to carry along, which of them has, any economic output bigger than the least state in Nigeria? Some of them are even poorer than our poorest states here. So in trying to think this thing, we must think it through. And what is this all about? This is all about trade. And what is trade all about? Trade is all about production. Okay? And that is where every other thing begins to happen. Now, what are we bringing to the table? When we have this common currency, what are we going to be trading with the currency? This is the point I'm trying to get everybody to, also look at. It's one thing for all of us to come and take a common currency, answer one common name, Naira, Echo, Sefa. What is the value vis-a-vis what you're bringing to the table? And every other thing that, determines that your convergence point are things that are within, outside your control. The trade we're talking about is outside our control. And this is why it becomes very easy, for us to be able to have these guys push everything they want to push, through our borders. Are you trying to get my point? So I think what is important for us here is to be able to, first and foremost, develop a proper production process that can be able to tie us together as a people. Okay? Prof has said he has relations all the way to Guadeloupe. And that's the truth. We are linked. Every border you have in Africa were false borders. Okay, so it is important that we remove those false borders. And the only way we can remove it is not by trading alone. It is by making certain that we produce what we trade. And we hold, there's no economy in Europe, technically, that is not predicated, okay, on Africa, vis-a-vis human capital and natural resources. Not one. So I think the beginning point is not for us to be able to all sit down and decide that it's important to have a common currency, and then when I start, running convergence programs that are not determined by our capacity of production, but are now determined, okay, by what somebody now feels is the rating of what you call your politics of international economic relations. This is where the problem is going to be coming from. And like I said before, we are looking at two things here, and we must be able to think it a little bit more deeply. This crisis that is brewing now is not going to go away in a very long time. We have also broken into the Francophone and Anglophone. Could this be the intention of just triggering that small conversation between a French president and an African president of no very mean consequence, if you may ask me, with a lot of due respect? Do you understand what I'm saying? So it's important that in thinking this thing through, what are we going to lose by having an Anglophone common currency? What are we going to gain by having an Anglophone currency that is now going to be trading at no value against the euro? And what will give you that value has to be your capacity to be able to do production that is home-based and homegrown.
Okay, Dr. Emeka Okengo, thanks a lot for your points. But just to further clarify this, when the ministers of finance and the governors of the central bank of the English-speaking West African countries met in Abuja, the decision wasn't to establish an English-speaking ECHO, if you like, or an English ECHO versus the French ECHO. They said, now, look, on the basis of what has happened, if you like now, the unilateral declaration of ECHO as a currency for CFA, that the authority of the heads of state and government of West Africa, of the entire ECOWAS sub-region, should now call for a meeting, because the French-speaking members of ECOWAS would appear to have violated the resolutions arrived at by the authority. The authority is the highest organ ECOWAS. So that's where we are at the moment. I know the point you, of course, the underlying point you are making is ultimately, it may very well say, okay, SAFA, you go your way, and then English ECO, you go your way. But I don't think we are at that point yet.
No, you're missing it, Kingsley.
Yeah, what's the point?
What's important is not where you are. Okay? What's important is, okay, you're meeting to say, okay, let's be able to discuss this. Currencies, okay, are simply what you use as a means of exchange for value. What is a value? So when you finish meeting and saying, okay, fine, this is what we're going to be doing, brother, until we're able to start thinking production, until we're able to start thinking trade, okay, what we've traded are what you call inputs or raw materials. Until you begin to value process those things, you're not going to be getting any value to your currency, no matter what you call it. That's the point I'm trying to make.
Okay.
So that meeting must be able to also now have conversion points that are homegrown, that are not supposed to be now be trading, based on other people's principles. Somebody says to you, of course, I mean, these people who are telling you, you must have inflation at 5%, have inflation at 49%, have inflation at 79%. So, I mean, how does that begin to make sense to you?
Okay, well, we'll come to the issue of, the indices that we need to run a common currency. But one point, again, still on what Dr. Emeka Okengo has said, and sometimes this is a popular point. I don't want to say it's a popular conception. How you will respond to it will be the issue. I'm talking about Dr. Chijoke Ekechukwu, Abuja Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Is it necessarily the case that we don't produce in West Africa? Is it necessarily the case that we don't, say in Nigeria, for instance, we don't produce? Production here referring to goods and services. Because I mean, those who are familiar with the Lagos area, you can see truckloads before the closure of the borders, truckloads of goods produced in Nigeria. You can quarrel about the local content of some of those goods. And before this time, well, circumstances have changed, but I need to cite this example. When the plastics industry was booming, in and around Lagos, truckloads were every time going. The plastics that were in use in West Africa all came from Nigeria. I don't know whether that's still the case. Textiles, slippers, and all kinds of things. They may not have been heavy-duty goods. In terms of services, there are other things. So, respond to that. Is it necessarily the case that there isn't much production happening intra-West Africa?
A lot is happening within West Africa, in fact, within Nigeria. If we're talking about streamlining the Anglophone countries from the Francophone, the purpose and objectives of common currency will be defeated. Because the common currency expects that we're going to be having an ease of doing business within the West African countries, reducing costs of doing this business, and of course integrating ourselves without such boundaries and barriers. Now, if we talk about having our own currency, obviously that will just defeat the aim. We are producing a whole lot. If we may not be producing in form of manufacturing, but a lot of agricultural products are leaving this country to various countries of the world, West Africa and other countries. So we cannot say, I don't want to agree that the echo has been dropped, or from your intro when you said it was dropped by the last meeting. No, they are only saying let's get back and talk about this furthermore and see what we're going to get out of it. The echo has been on the drawing table for such a long time, for up to 30 years or more. And so the benefits of ECO, or the benefits of a common currency, have been considered before that decision was taken. And of course, we know the benefits countries that have common currencies have been having. And so that's what we want to have. And I know that once this one succeeds, AU is going to be talking about their own common currency. But having said this, we need to look at it from a position of strength. We need to look at it from a position of strength. We have the strength, and so, like I said before, we need to be determining whatever steps that will be taken because of our size. Size in population, size in economy, and size in manpower and everything. So we're not going to be leaving it to be determined by one foreign currency somewhere that has one ulterior motive they want to achieve. Just like Dr. Meka said, each time I travel to Europe, I usually wonder what is giving these people the kind of money they declare in terms of GDP level and all those. Nothing more but all the things you read that they get from Africa. Look at all the things happening in Nigeria, and of course, once any African country discovers oil, you see an European country come immediately and start the processing of that. And so that is just how all these things are playing out. Once we're able to have a common currency, we can have a common front, and we can actually determine certain rates, international currency rates today. So that means we cannot drop the aspect of having a common currency, but of course make sure that we're in control to ensure that we determine the pace and determine all the steps to be taken.
The question that Kingsley asked, are we really producing intra-Africa?
Yeah, we are producing. That's what I'm saying. We are producing. Apart from the manufacturing we are doing, which obviously is not optimal.
Yes.
Which obviously is not optimal. But there are a lot of agricultural produce we are getting and sending out of this country. In a common currency, the advantage you get is both for export and for import. So if you think Nigeria is going to be a dumping ground, no. We're also going to be moving a lot of our products seamlessly out of this country to some other African countries that need our products. He mentioned that every day you see a lot of people come to Lagos, buy things and take out of Nigeria, out of Lagos to West African countries. Common currency is also going to aid that, because before you start thinking of exchange rates to do, and exchange rate, you lose some money, you gain some money with the fluctuation in rates, we're going to remove all those. So no doubt is going to be of advantage to Nigeria and other West African countries.
Sorry, I don't want to interject. Yeah. Let me use Kingsley's example. He talked about plastics. How many people know that the raw material from plastics actually comes from crude oil? And that what we do is that we export crude oil and import resins or polyester. How many people know that 80% of the so-called fabrics that we wear now are made from nonwoven, which also come, from byproducts of petroleum? And that everything you're bringing in here as plastic, you actually bring in the products, polyester or polymer, as finished materials, and then it becomes your raw materials. Chijoke is talking about that we're producing. Now, production has to do more with your inputs. Agricultural inputs. What are we producing from agriculture? Name one thing. We have just managed to get self-sufficient in rice after a long struggle. Every other thing we are doing is to just support, some pharmaceutical industry abroad. Every agricultural product that we produce in Nigeria comes as not even raw material, as some component of inputs. And then when they go out, they look at your cocoa and your chocolate, rather. What are we producing? What you're just doing is valorization. At the best, make it seaworthy, and then comes back, and then you start trading on the produce that should have given your currency the value in it to be able to negotiate on that table that is called the politics of international economic relations.
Yeah, Dr. Emeka Okwengu, thanks a lot for your points. Don't forget also what you said earlier, that look, in taking a holistic view of the eco currency, we also must have a future view of things. We aren't likely to remain like this. If our petrochemical industry, if our refining processes were much better, say in Nigeria, who says that we cannot be supplying lubricants to the rest of West Africa, for instance? I mean, the petrochemical industry at the moment is working, but what is the extent of that they are able to function? But still, there are other issues appertaining to a common currency. That's why we're returning to our Benin Network studios. Professor Michael Bada, you'll be listening to the comments and counter-comments here in the Abuja studios. I was just wondering, 2020 was the year, I'm saying was now, on the heels of the developments arising from French-speaking West Africa, for the formal takeoff of the eco currency. Unfortunately, other than the politics introduced by French-speaking West Africa, we hadn't even totally met the convergence criteria. In your opinion, what else should we be doing before we now say, all right, there's a political will to launch this in 2020, but unfortunately we aren't there yet, so we'll have to hold back?
I beg your pardon, Kingsley. Can you recast your question, please?
My question is, politics has come in now with the French-speaking West Africa saying they're going to adopt the name ECO. And according to ECOWAS, 15 member countries, ECO was supposed to take off this year. But we do know that not all countries had met the convergence criteria. Now, the heads of state have expressed their political will to see this take off, but it looks potentially economically suicidal to proceed with it. In that case, what would be your suggestion as to what the region would do, in particular for us as a country, Nigeria?
Thank you very much. Obviously, the Common Currency Project has had very significant challenges over the years, and it is because of those challenges that progress on the implementation of the roadmap has been relatively slow. What can be observed is that the challenges derive from the problems encountered in most of the member states. Other than the lack of political will and commitment by the member states of ECOWAS to the Common Currency Project, or generally the Monetary Cooperation Program, you found a situation whereby, member states had been buffeted by varying economic shocks and, problems which had taken their priorities away from the single currency project. And importantly, perhaps against the backdrop of such significant economic shocks, the majority of them have not been able to meet the macroeconomic convergence criteria on a sustained basis, such that even at some point in time, you have one or two countries meeting the criteria, then perhaps a year or so later, the countries slip off and they cease to meet the criteria again. So sustainability in meeting the criteria has been a major challenge. Yet, the macroeconomic convergence criteria are critical if the single currency objective has to be realized. If a harmonized monetary system has to obtain, in the West African sub-region. Because the macroeconomic convergence criteria, as had been pointed out by the panelists, relate to the budget, the proportion of the budget that can be financed through deficit, that can be deficit. Budget deficit ratio of less than 3%, gross external reserves, which will be more than 3 months import cover, inflation rate, which should be less than 5%. Then you also have the proportion of deficit financing by the central bank of the country. It should not be more than 10% of the previous year's revenue. And then importantly, the issue of public debt. Public debt to GDP ratio should not be more than 70%. And of course, the ECOWAS group expects the nominal exchange rate to be fairly stable, to vary within a particular band. These criteria are very necessary and critical, because if they are not met, then you can find a situation whereby member countries implement inconsistent policies which create problem for monetary and price stability, which is the ultimate goal anyway. If you're having a single currency that is stable, the objective is to ensure that prices are stable, monetary aggregates are stable, and then economic growth and development can take place in a seamless way. And if you then find a situation whereby an undisciplined member, of the group, or some undisciplined members of the group are incurring excessive fiscal deficits, such excessive deficits will become a burden on the rest members, of the union. And because at some point in time, they may have to bail out, the member state. And because of these considerations, basically, member states must meet the macroeconomic convergence conditions to a very reasonable extent for even the single currency project to move forward. And what it then means is that strategies would have to be adopted to enable the member states strengthen their economies in such a way that they are able to meet the macroeconomic convergence criteria. And so in terms of moving forward, there are no two ways about it. Member states must be ready in terms of these criteria. If they are not ready, then definitely the single currency project cannot be realized. What it then means is that, the Francophone, well, incidentally, Kingsley, the Francophone group is already largely integrated monetary-wise. They have a single central bank, which West African Monetary Zone does not have at the moment. They have their single currency. So largely, they are more integrated monetarily than the rest of the region. So going forward, actually, my suggestion would be that there should be engagements. If the intention of the Francophone group is not to secede and be on their own, then the authority of heads of state and government should engage them to find ways, of bringing them back into the loop, such that, the heads of state group will also examine the extent to which those countries in the group have met the convergence criteria on individual basis, not as a group. And then, of course, going forward too, if the Francophone group, that is to say the West African Economic and Monetary Union group, will have to work with the rest of ECOWAS, then the question of linking their own ECO with the euro should not arise. They will have to delink, and it is the responsibility of the ECOWAS group as a whole to determine the kind of exchange rate, whether to have a central rate which does not have a link with any external anchor or currency, or they will also decide whether to have a central exchange rate in the sub-region which has a link with an external anchor. It could be the dollar, the euro, or the special drawing rights of the IMF. These will be decisions that will be jointly taken by all, and not necessarily by one subgroup, of the sub-region.
Thank you very much, Professor Michael Baden. Thank you for your thoughts there. We'll take a break now, and when we come back, we'll be taking your tweets. Some of you have sent in your tweets already. If you have any questions, you have comments, you have contributions on this issue, you can send us your tweets via our Twitter handle at NTAGMN. We'll take a short break now, and when we come back, Good Morning Nigeria, continue. Stay with us.
All right, you're welcome back, and it's still Good Morning Nigeria live on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority. As my colleague Rhoda indicated, we have a number of tweets already, and we'll take those tweets now. Abdul, while I agree that we should have a common currency for ECOWAS, we should not allow ourselves to be recolonized economically. I suspect a powerful country trying to destabilize English-speaking West Africa.
Akejo Lagbaju says Nigeria and indeed other Anglophone countries are right to reject the early adoption of eco currency. The Francophone countries shouldn't be also blamed for earlier declaration because of the pressure of her citizens to quit a CFA, which is tied to the vulgarity of the euro.
That should be the volatility, I believe, of the euro. Amogbala Babs, eco-currency is a no-no. It's an agenda surreptitiously fostered on Francophone countries that will see France dictate the pace of their economies. It's good Nigeria turned it down.
This one is from Etim. Etim says it's an opportunity for Nigeria to dump the ECHO project, not just because of the French sabotage, but also because it is a very complex enterprise.
Dele Jack Solomon, can we say that the introduction of ECHO as a subcontinental legal entity is politically and economically motivated, considering the tensions between Nigeria and her neighbors, which include Francophone Benin and Niger, following Nigeria's decision to close its borders as of August last year?
Idongesit Williams says the real impediment to trade in the region is not the lack of single currency, but that countries do not have much to trade. West African countries must reform their economies with diversification and added value industries. That's the only way.
Mike Ayankwo, I want to state categorically that Nigeria should reject in its entirety the eco-currency regime. The adoption of this currency, instead of helping us, will exacerbate our economic challenges. It will lead to hyperinflation and make nonsense of the cashless economy CBN is working very hard to achieve.
Law Alpha C tweets, it says enough of that big brother Nigeria, that Nigeria seems to be playing in Africa at the expense of majority of its citizens suffering untold hardship, and it's unfortunate Nigerians are being discriminated against mostly in Africa.
Akinade, Nigeria should not join. It will affect our naira value the more.
And Chris Simeon tweet says, I said it earlier, ECO single currency adoption only favors Francophone countries of ECOWAS. Nigeria and other non-French-speaking countries of ECOWAS may experience shortcomings in their trading activities if this single currency is adopted.
Sonny Michael Amakoje, the level of knowledge gap in Africa is overwhelming. Why must any country therefore be forced to accept the eco currency? Even in Europe, there is Brexit. We need to upgrade our mentality instead of dwelling on other issues.
Ibrahim Tudu tweets, he says, is this eco currency by force? I don't understand. French CFA francs under the guise of ECOWAS single currency? Me, I don't support economic terrorism.
Abubakar Muhammad, I concur with Professor Dama on his view that this eco-currency program is in French interest. We don't have to follow the interests of France because they have already destroyed our economy.
And this final one is from Ibrahim Bello. He says, I must say that the trend in common currency issue must be looked into critically, given the fact that Nigeria, as the giant economy in West Africa, must be duly carried along in all economic ramifications, or otherwise we say no to ECO if it will not advance our economy anyway. Well, those are the tweets that we have now. You can still be a part of this conversation. All you have to do is tweet at us at our Twitter handle at NTAGMN. Gentlemen, Professor Nazifi Dama, what happens if the Francophone countries decide to go ahead with their decision? What could likely happen?
No, let me rephrase your question. What should we do in the context of what has happened? Because a leopard would never change its skin. Right from the formation of ECOWAS, the French-speaking West African countries have been consistent in their attitude of not aligning with Nigeria and English-speaking West African countries. And unfortunately, my thought was that when we are doing, or when we are at the process of conceiving the ECO, the English-speaking countries should have learned the lessons of over 40 to 50 years treachery of the French-speaking West African countries and come up with a contingency strategy in case of the crystallization of what has been done by the French-speaking West African countries.
They didn't see it coming.
No. maybe they were too over-optimistic about the attitude of the French-speaking African countries. But I said, a leopard will never change its skin. So the reality is for us, for me, this happening is a very, very big opportunity to wake up the can-do spirit in the 200 million Nigerians. Let us work in the next 10 years to create a $2 trillion economy. Every of the single currency convergence criteria revolve around domestic production characterized with value addition, satisfying domestic production and exportation. Everything about commonality of trade starts from your ability to produce domestically. We have one of the most fertile land, but importantly, we have one of the most resilient, hardworking, dedicated people you can ever find in the world. So what we need to do is to use those advantages. Our political leaders, particularly His Excellency Mr. President and the governors, to sit down at National Economic Council, not for one day. I am suggesting for a consecutive 3-day meeting. How can Nigeria be able to survive on its own in the face of this? How can Nigeria dominate West Africa and counter French economic conspiracy? How can we be a force to be reckoned with by everybody in West Africa and Africa, whether they like it or not? Because if you have the economic power, there is no way anybody cannot relate with you. And we have the strength, we have the potentiality. Every single state you take in this country, with the fertile land that we have, with the millions and millions of arable unutilized land we have, with the projected increase in the demand for agricultural products that are mostly not of synthetic nature, but on the use of, I am forgetting the word,
talking about organic produce.
Organic, yeah. We can produce so much organically, not to export raw, but to add value to it. I was with Emeka in the Committee of Federal Ministry of Agriculture. Somebody told us that he gave out his land in Benin, and they grow cashew on it. He don't know how much they are earning, but on every single tree, they are giving him 10,000 naira rent per year. Just cashew.
On every tree?
On every single tree that they grew on the land. So if you have a land...
Did you say Benin? Did you say Benin Republic or
Benin?
Edo State.
Edo State.
Okay, all right. So, Professor, just hold on a second.
Let me
just hold. Professor Abada is also in Benin. Prof, after this program, I think I have to take a flight, to meet you so that we can make this arrangement.
So look at the demand for sesame seed in the Middle East region.
That's right.
Look at the demand for goat. Saudi Arabia is demanding to import goats. 3 million pieces of goat. They went to Gambia. Gambia told them that they have only 4 million population of goats. Look at the potentialities. But you see, individual Nigerians, however resilient they may appear to be, there is a limit to what they can do in the absence of organized political leadership that provide the needed policy, drive, and motivation. And we need this from our political leaders so that at the end of the day, the issue of having low inflation, once you have strong domestic productivity, you will have low inflation. The issue of import cover, once you have strong domestic production capacity, you will be able to have so much important reserve and you can be able to import everything. But we cannot continue to be an import-dependent oriented economy when we have one of the best potentialities for local production, processing, and exportation.
All right, Professor Nazifi Dama, thanks a lot for that wake-up call, as it were, arising from the challenges, the launch of EcoCurrency. I was going to be tempted to go to Professor Obada in Benin, not with regard to the cashew cultivation, but we'll take that up after this program. But Emeka Okengo, I know that what Professor Nazifi Dama has said is in sync with your thoughts. So if there's any addition you want to add to that, give us some VAT on that.
Yes, it's not only in sync with my thoughts. It's not only in sync with my thoughts. It's also the only way to go. We must be able to not also use a sledgehammer to kill an ant. Because when you're talking about a country like Benin Republic, please just think about Yobe State. Okay, when you're talking about a country, these are the people who are going to be sitting and voting. You're talking about countries like Guinea and et al. I mean, without any disrespect intended. Okay, if you're remembering the fact that for every black person you see, they say 8 out of every 10 are Nigerians. You're talking about a country that has 81 million hectares of arable land. Now, there are 4 things, rather, that decides what to... As a young person, I flew to England at 7 naira in Nigerian Airways. At that time, the dollar was exchanging for 1 naira or 70 kobo to $1. And 1 naira for 1 pound. Okay? I did. And something was happening. It wasn't because we were a beautiful country. It was because we had, agroforestry producing cash crops that were in very high demand. Timber, cocoa, palm, et al. Where Kingsley comes from, if you wanted to lie to somebody that you had traveled abroad, you enter into NIFO and take photographs. Nobody will believe that those photographs were taken in Nigeria when NIFO was working. Now, what am I trying to say? There are 4 things.
I used to play tennis on the very good courts of NIFO.
Beautiful. There are 4 things.
This was in the 70s, though.
Yes, there are 4 things you need. Yes, there are 4 things you need. You need to be able to now determine your revenue, because that's what gives you your place in the policies of economic relationships. 1 is what you call your natural resources. 2 is what you call your human resources against your human capital. 3 is what you call your technology. 4, like Professor Dama has said, is what you call your value processing. Now, this, and then it begins to now grow your competitiveness, or what you call your market share. You know the truth, rather. A new thing is happening now. Everybody is talking about e-commerce. Everybody is talking about ICT. Now, do you know what e-commerce is all about? It's all about the ease of moving goods and services. That Oga or Google or whatever it is you're using, or Jumai, is going to be bringing goods to your doorstep, and then you pay with your card. So it's all about goods. That's what gives you value. Prof said we're in a committee together. He didn't tell the whole of the story. Okay? No, it's a story that if you tell. So what's my point? So that I don't take all this whole space. We need our brothers. We need their land. We need to bring them in. We need for them to understand that this is not about them. It's about us. Now, let me tell you one thing Europe will never allow to happen to them again, is for what China or the Asian tigers did to them to happen a second time. That's what caused the subprime. They have not been able to get out of the subprime mortgage crisis. As far as I'm concerned, now, Europe is dancing the day they lose Africa. And that's why I said in the opening, can we please also step aside and see if this is a catch-22 situation that France has brought upon us? Oh, let us use this opportunity and do away with these people. We don't need them. No, we need them. But do you know what it is we need to do? There are 2 ways we can get about it. Either we do it through hostility. That's what they call hostile takeover. Okay? And then, make certain that you don't become a problem by not eating and then staying awake and trying to steal from me. I'll force you to be able to get good food. What am I talking about? There has to be the recolonization of Africa by Nigeria. If we don't do this and we say let them go, trust me, as far as they have that sovereign national borders, they are going to be opening it, and they are going to be a very heavy. If a word was passed, it would have been a lot easier to take. There will be a very heavy security, burden to Africa and to Nigeria.
So what are you saying?
What I'm saying is that we must, as a country, develop a very conscious and cautious program of, I don't want to use the word colonization because it's a little bit, unkind. But we must be able to make certain that we carry all our brothers along. Okay? If Nigeria has 80% of the population of Africa, Nigeria must be able to control 80% of the trade and services coming out of Africa. If we're able to do that, trust me, France will not need to talk to anybody apart from us. And you know what? Like Idi Amin says, because I'm a great man, they come to kneel before me. Every other country will come to kneel before us, because, rather, it is all about revenue. That is what gives your currency what it is.
Okay.
That's all.
All right, Dr. Emeka Okengu, thank you very much. Let's return to Professor Mike Obano in our Benin Network studios. And gentlemen, you've been talking about all of this. I'm sure that experts in international politics will readily recall what happened to Guinea-Conakry with regard to its drive for independence. And much earlier, you also remember what happened to Haiti and why Haiti remains what it is today in the Western Hemisphere. But Professor Mike Obadan, earlier, while you were describing the condition of integration in Francophone West Africa, you did talk about their own central bank. I was just wondering, because part of the institutional arrangements to facilitate a common currency, say ECHO, as agreed to by the authority of the heads of states and governments of West Africa, will require you having monetary and physical authorities across the West African sub-region, as it were. Now, 2020, again, is supposed to be the takeoff time. From your experience in monetary policy management, do you think that there is sufficient institutional capacity to drive this monetary integration?
Thank you, Kingsley, for the very important question. Yes, I will say partly there are some institutions in place to drive the monetary integration agenda. The roadmap clearly shows a number of institutions that should be in place. As at this point in time, we have the West African Monetary Agency located in Freetown. We have the West African Monetary Institute established in the early 2000s, which has actually been preparing ground, for the various elements of activities for the monetary integration process. That one is on ground. And I think it's also working with some other agencies, to establish a common central bank, for the entire sub-region, which will be responsible for, printing and managing, the common currency, that will be, agreed upon and, used, by the sub-region. It's just that perhaps action is relatively slow on the central bank, issue. But I think, efforts are going on to establish the central bank. That in itself, would cover the entire sub-region as envisaged. You see, the central bank for the West African Economic and Monetary Union, or Francophone group, is for that group, and is the one issuing the CFA franc, for that very group. So as it were, most of the institutions are in place. I also recall that the Convergence Council is also in place. That is actually the institution responsible for monitoring the degree of compliance of member states, with the macroeconomic convergence criteria. So most of the institutions are in place. It's just that, like I said before, the member states have shown continuous inability to meet the convergence criteria. And that is where, the economies need to be strengthened so that they can all be on the same pedestal. Otherwise, the single currency objective will not be realized. Maybe I should just add, Kingsley, that the single currency project is a project of the entire ECOWAS sub-region, and it is in the interest of the sub-region to have the single currency topping all the other activities. It is the ultimate in the monetary integration agenda. But the hijacking of the ECO currency is not in the interest of the entire ECOWAS sub-region. It's in the interest of, the Francophone group and France. And so efforts will have to be made to bring that group back to sanity, because their action as at now smacks of insincerity, and the trust must have to be rebuilt. So you have to bring them back. But if they show signs that they are not willing, to abide by the rules and the processes of the entire sub-region, then the rest members of the ECOWAS would have to take a decision as to how they move their fortunes, forward. I think that's a very important thing. I think that's where I spoke before, because it all depends on the attitude of the Francophone group from now on. If they show cooperation, they should be able to swallow their ego, which is their characteristic problem, and then join forces with the rest members of the ECOWAS group to move the entire sub-region's agenda forward. But where that one is not forthcoming, the rest members should be free to take decisions that will promote their own interest.
All right, thank you very much, Professor Mike Obadan there. I'm afraid, gentlemen, that's where we draw the curtain on this discussion.
Yeah, I just want to go there before you thank the guests and sign up. We'd just like to apologize to our viewers. You saw the caption there describing Professor Mike Obadan. It's a member of the Central Bank of Nigeria Monetary, not Monitoring Policy Committee, MPC, monetary, relating to money.
All right. Thank you very much. Let's, on that note, we want to say, gentlemen, I'm very sure that as the ECOWAS heads of state reconverge for another meeting, of course, the subsequent meetings will get some more update as to what would be done. And I'm very sure that we'll be back on this discussion very soon. And I hope that at that time we'll have you guys join us again. All right, so on that note, I want to say Chijioke, Dr. Chijioke Ikechukwu, he is the former DG of the Abuja Chambers of Commerce and Industry. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Also, a very big thank you to our regular on Good Morning Nigeria, Professor Nazifi Dama, Professor of Economics. Thank you so much, Prof.
Thank you very much, and may Allah bless Nigeria and Nigerians.
Amen. Thank you so much. And of course, Dr. Emeka Okengu is a development analyst and of course,
farmer.
He's also a farmer.